Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another webinar from BSI. Today, the topic is maintaining digital resilience during disruptive incidents. I'm glad that you will be having your 1 hour here with me. I will talk about the agenda for those who are new to this webinar series. As some of us may know that we have developed 8 webinars. We call them mini webinars because they are like 30 minutes of discussion and then 30 minutes of Q&A session that can help everyone to have the idea about the basic topics, the fundamentals, and then an opportunity to have a live session that we can have question and answer. So first of all, again, for those who are not familiar with these webinars, a few housekeeping rules. You will be muted during the entire session, but you can have your questions on our Q&A section of the application here. End of the webinar, dear everyone, I will be answering all these questions, and then we will go from there. End of the webinar means, in fact, after the first 30 minutes, that's what we're going to do, and we will continue from there. So the another significant thing here is please don't hesitate to send your questions during the webinar. During this 30 minutes, like I mentioned, I will go through all of them, and if there are any questions left that could not be answered during these 30 minutes, the second 30 minutes, please rest assured we will reach out to you with the answer of your question. So we are collecting them, and everyone's questions will be answered. That's our promise. Okay, great. So it's a quite interesting topic. I'm pretty sure that these 30 minutes will be quite helpful for everyone here, or at least it will be opening new questions, even you are familiar with this topic, because today I will discuss about the standards that I can call them like beyond ISO 27001. They have a focus on digital resilience, and maybe some of you, or maybe none of you, have heard about these standards before, or did not study on these standards that much detailed, whatever we can provide in this 30 minutes. Okay, so just a reminder, dear everyone, we reached to the second phase of our webinar series. We completed 3 webinars in the first one. If some of us have joined, the first one was people, and now we are at the second phase, which is respond with clarity, coordination, and trust. For those who have missed those first 3 webinars, I strongly recommend to allocate some time to go through the recordings of that. Our marketing team will be working on that one so that you can receive the recordings and you can find them, or that can be one of your questions, how we can find these recordings. In fact, I strongly recommend them. That will be quite helpful to spend your 3 hours on these past 3 webinars. Now, in this second one, again, I have the privilege to run the first one. And then the second one will be happening on 18th of May, building effective public warning and instant response systems. Following that, we will go to the last phase, phase 3. I just want to leave it as a surprise to everyone, and let's keep some curiosity within us. So we will be seeing it when the time comes. But I'm looking forward to have you on the next webinar that will take place on 18th of May as well. Okay, so here is the agenda. Just after that, we will kick off. Now, just like any other, the previous webinars that we had, we have a very short, very succinct, very high-level agenda, because we have 30 minutes to go to discuss some deep topics here, just to provide you some fundamentals, basically, as I mentioned earlier. So the first one will be getting everyone on the track, reminding to some of you, refreshing memories of some of yours, or providing some new information with the information management system controls. Basically, we are talking about ISO 27001 controls. Of course, those who are familiar, there are 93 controls in ISO 27001 standard, which I can say the main international standard for information security management. We will not be discussing all of them. We will be discussing the ones that are relevant to digital resilience. And we will also discuss about the logic behind placing them under Annex A controls basically answering the question, why do we need these controls and what is the relevance of these controls with digital resilience? The next topic will be business continuity in information and communication technologies. I will be quite excited if I were you. I will be quite excited to go through this part because we will talk about a standard which is honestly one of my favorites, ISO 2731 standard. And some of us, like I mentioned, may never heard about this standard. And those who heard, I'm pretty sure majority of us did not have the chance to open the pages of this standard to go through it. So we will discover this standard, we will unlock this standard. And as I mentioned, I will complete these two uh, sections in 30 minutes, 25 minutes, left 25 minutes, and then we will go to your questions in the upcoming 30 minutes. Okay, so we will start with a poll question to know more about you, to familiarize myself initially more about you, so that I can do some small customizations the way that I'm running this webinar. So it will be great if you can please answer that question. How would you describe your organization's current approach to information security? That will give us an idea about what is happening within your organization currently. Please look from a perspective that information security, but like a digital resilience part of it. This will definitely help us to have a better idea. Okay, so we are getting more replies, but I can say that the options, we have a certified ISMS in place, and we have some controls, but nothing formal, are head-to-head, like 50% to 50%. That's quite interesting, despite many replies that we have received. Okay, great. Thank you very much for your replies. So let's proceed with the webinar topics. Dear everyone, the first one is information security management system controls. But as mentioned here, we will even go beyond them. We will discuss about why they are there and what is the relevance of them with digital resilience. Now, first of all, as some of us might be familiar, the ISO 27001 standard, just like any other ISO standards, especially type A requirement standards, they are shaped based on the trends happening on globally. These trends that we are taking like a decade or more than a decade of the things that happened in the world and adding on the expertise that we have on building an ISO standard, ISO's relevant technical committees incorporate these new trends into the new edition, and we are having the latest edition of these standards. Now, just to remind all of you, the brief history of ISO 27001, currently we have the third edition of this standard. The very first edition was published in 2005, and then we had the second edition 8 years later in 2013, and after that, 9 years later, in 2022, we had the latest, the third edition of ISO 27001. And what triggers these versions, these new editions, and additions of these new controls or requirements? Now, here is a great example for ISO 27001's latest edition. We have seen that increasing risk of single point of failure. So organizations are more dependent on other organizations, service providers. A great example of that, we will also see a few more slides here. A great example of that is dependency on cloud service providers. Now, compared to early 2010s, 2000s, I can say maybe all organizations, at least like all Fortune 500 organizations, they are working with cloud service providers. So when we say that the information technologies, majority of them, their software, their infrastructure, their platforms are basically hosted by cloud service providers. So the question is, if any of these well-known cloud service providers collapse, if a disruption happens to their services, does it mean thousands of organizations will be affected from that? Definitely. The answer to the question is yes. These organizations, which we can call them cloud service users, they will not be able to access their data. They will not be able to provide mobile application, browser application services to their clients. They will not be able to use their computers. These can be information technologies or operational technologies. Operational technologies, the risk is higher there. Like, let's think about infrastructure organizations, critical infrastructure organizations, just like energy utilities, telecommunication organizations, healthcare sector. There is a high risk that all these may collapse at the same time due to a disruption to a cloud service provider. So this risk was quite low early 2000s or early 2010s as well. But in our world today, it's an increasing and it's a high risk. Of course, human errors, the human errors that we could not mitigate for a very long time, the controls are not always as effective as technological controls maybe. They are still existing. The other thing is continuing increase of ransomware threats. Dear everyone, there are some interesting statistics here. Those of us who are familiar with ransomware attacks or cybersecurity, let me say in general, we will know that ransomware attacks have never seen a minus growth, a decrease. It's always growing. But while we are having new ransomware attacks, aren't we developing new technologies to prevent them? Yes, we do. But the defense are getting more advanced, attacks are getting also more advanced. And there is a very interesting statistics here. In 2025, compared to previous year, 2024, ransomware instance increased by 32%. That's a huge increase. That's an exponential increase, right? When we take a look at year-on-year increase. So attacks to especially manufacturing industry has increased by 56% in 2025. Like 1.5x increase compared to previous year. Despite we have advanced technologies now for defense, for preventing, for protecting organizations from these attacks, still the number of attacks are increasing. I want to take your attention to that. This does not mean the number of successful attacks. There is a huge difference between them. These are the number of attacks. So maybe majority of them are prevented, which we don't have data here. Okay, digital supply chain, another increasing risk, which makes our lives easier, which brings cost effectiveness, which brings efficiency, speed, but reliance on digital supply chains are increasing. Due to that, the risks relevant to, we can also link it with single point of failure here, the risks relevant to disruptions are increasing as well. And the other one is, again, just like ransomware attacks, those who are familiar with or those who are working in cybersecurity environment, you will know that the index for vulnerability, CV index, which is never going down. In 2025, we have seen that the total number of vulnerabilities have been increased to by 20%, now exceeding more than 48,000 vulnerabilities that we could discover on operational and information technologies. Okay. Now, again, it will be a quick reminder while we are discussing about digital resilience. Of course, we cannot ignore the main standard of information security, ISO 27001. ISO 27001, as I mentioned, dear everyone, you can see this corrigendum here. That corrigendum is a subtle minor addition to the standard, but the original version of it is still 2022 version. This is just for your information. We don't have a new edition since then. Just wanted to inform you. Now, here it says includes more than 90 security controls. I can give you the exact number exactly. 93 controls are listed, information security controls are listed in 27001. But we will be seeing in upcoming slides which of these controls are relevant to digital resilience. Let's take a look. Now, a little bit more details about these NXA controls. It will be helpful to have an idea what happened in this new edition. Dear everyone, some of us may remember the previous edition of this standard, 2013 edition of this standard. There had been 116 controls. In the new edition of this standard, 24 of these controls are merged. In some cases, 2, some cases 3, in some cases 4 controls became a single control in the new edition of this standard. 58 of them went through a revision, especially terminologies, wording revisions. And something that will be a significant part of our discussions, we now have 11 new, brand new controls. And the distribution of these 11 new controls compared to 27001 2013 edition, we have 4 categories. These 93 controls, all of them are placed under 4 categories, like organizational, people, physical, and technological. Now, distribution of these 11 new controls, 3 of them are under organizational, 1 of them are under physical, that's physical monitoring control. We will see the details of this control on the next slide, by the way. But as we can guess, due to the updates, due to the improvements happened, or due to the new risks introduced in the world since the previous edition of the standard was published, majority of these new controls are falling under technological controls group. So let's see them, what these 11 controls look like. Dear everyone, as you can see, threat intelligence, let me skip these 2, I will come back there. Physical security monitoring, configuration management, information deletion, data masking, DLP. These 3 controls are mostly relevant to privacy, by the way. Monitoring activities, web filtering, and secure coding. In this webinar, as they are quite relevant with digital resilience theme, we will be focusing on these 2 controls. Information security for use of cloud services. We will have a brief discussion on that, but we will have relatively a longer discussion on information and communication technologies, readiness for business continuity. We have a separate section only for this control and the relevant guideline standard. Okay, so what is beyond 27001 that might be relevant to digital resilience? Just like we mentioned, dear everyone, cloud security. We have seen a control under 27001, a very short, 1-sentence control, but we have a huge, long, dedicated guideline standard that would be relevant to only this small, succinct, short control about cloud security, 2770. We have a guideline standard, international standard, dedicated for personally identifiable information, or in other words, privacy information in the cloud, managing security of privacy information in the cloud. We have ISO 2719 standard, which is a guideline for energy utilities, the critical infrastructure, because continuity of critical infrastructure services would be significant for survival of a city, of a country, right? And here again on the left, the standard that I just mentioned to you, we will have a separate section only for that. Information and communication technologies readiness for business continuity. Then another significant standard, which is like an umbrella standard that brings all these other topic standards together to make them work in a harmony, like top management. This is the standard for information security governance. And finally, another one, this is also relevant to critical infrastructure. We have an guideline standard dedicated for healthcare sector, 27799. Just one of the standards I would like to also share with you, which is not here. That's also relevant to critical infrastructure, information security guideline on another critical infrastructure, 27011. This is the guideline for telecommunication industry. That's also a significant one for anyone who would like to know more. Okay, ensure you are managing your digital supply chain risk. So let's start with digital supply chain. We will then relate it with ISO 27001. Dear everyone, in the current edition of this standard, we have this requirement. Organization shall ensure, these are the clause, that's the clause requirement, not a control, that externally provided processes, products, or services that are relevant to the information security management system are controlled. As you see, that's a more detailed, more elaborated version of the previous edition requirement about supply chain. Ensure that outsourced processes are controlled. Now, we know that the risks relevant to supply chains are increasing. Our dependencies on supply chains are increasing because the world has changed a lot since 1950s, 1960s. At these times, of course, manufacturing industry was quite significant, right? But there was a more conservative approach on working with suppliers. Generally, organizations, these giant organizations, manufacturing organizations, preferring to implement, establish, maintain, improve processes within the same organization. So like a giant end-to-end organization that we were talking about. But in today's world, there had been some significant change here. Now we are talking about a more centralized, smaller, governance, more important organizations, which work with more suppliers across the globe. It is not different in the digital space as well. So the physical, let me call it, supply chains are, of course, tangible, the things that we can see, the things that we can monitor well, and the supply chains that we have experienced for decades. But digital supply chain is intangible. It is not easy to measure as much as the physical supply chain. And also, we have an increasing dependency on the digital supply chains. So this is why when we are talking about digital resilience, supply chain risk management is a very significant part of that. Now, how will 27001 help us? 27001 lists, as you see here, 4 different controls under Annex A directly relevant to supply chain risk management. Information security in supply relationships, A519. The next control just after that, 520, addressing information security in supplier agreements. The next control, 521, managing information security in the ICT supply chain. And the last one here, last of these 4 controls, monitoring, review, and change management of supplier services. Okay. So let's go to the cloud services. As we said, we just recently discussed about supply chain resilience, supply chain, digital supply chain risk management, and another significant one, because this is one of the significant supply chains today, is cloud service providers. Now, we have a control in 27001 standard, but apart from that, as you see, we have met 27017 before and 27018. We also have 22123 part 1 standard, which is also a guideline relevant to cloud service providers and cloud service users. So here is the standard, dear everyone. So what is happening in this standard? There are 32 controls here initially that have additional guidance to 27001 controls. All 33 of them apply to cloud users, and among these 32, 30 of them apply to cloud service providers, the CSPs. We also have 7 dedicated controls for information security in cloud services. 5 of them apply to cloud users, but all 7 of them apply to cloud service providers. So this standard basically, from a risk management perspective, provides us the list of controls that are relevant to cloud security, cloud services security, from a user perspective and provider perspective. Of course, implementing this standard or or just going through the guidelines of this standard and find out the ones that are relevant to our organization's context would help us to have a better view on our digital resilience. Maybe it will help us to realize the risks that we did not identify before, or the controls not implemented, or implemented but not at a maturity level to support our digital resilience. That's quite a significant standard from this perspective. Now, we will have our second poll before we proceed to ISO 2731 standard. So the question is, which of these digital risks concern your organization most right now? Interesting and great question. Looking forward to your replies. Wow, it was a great start. Currently, majority of us selected human error and configuration mistakes, but let's see the rest of the team. Okay, we have some more on cloud service disruptions. Thank you very much. That's also quite interesting. But human error, as usual, still the biggest part of the votes. Okay. So the ransomware and cyber attacks, supply chain and third parties are the least ones that are voted, but the majority of the votes have gone to human error and configuration mistakes. Well, thank you very much for attending the second poll. We will have one last one through the end of the webinar as well. Now, before we proceed to Q&A session, we will be going through ISO 2731. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I believe that will be the most interesting part of this webinar, even though we will have a quick overview of this standard and how it supports digital resilience for organizations across the globe. So, information and communication technologies readiness for business continuity. Why disruptions on information technologies? Please include the operational technologies as well, like SCADA systems as well. Why disruptions to them became a critical business risk? Now, we can think that today, many, if not all, banking services are working on or depending on digital environment, cyber environment, right? However, if you think about that, we did not have the first bank established in the world when we invented information technologies. The first bank was invented more than 150 years ago when there was no competing systems. And they were still providing banking services. But in today's world, banking services, financial services are quite agile. They are easy to reach. And they are user and client friendly, thanks to heavy reliance on or heavy usage on information technologies. This is why walking from banking industry, having it as an example, we can understand why information technology disruptions are becoming more and more critical business risks for the organizations. And this reliance on technology, it seems like it will be again exponentially increasing as we consider future management tools, emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, right? So this is why our technology reliance will be getting more and more rather than getting lower. So there are a few ideas here. The things that we briefly discussed when we were discussing about why we had a new edition of ISO 27001. Cloud service disruptions is one of the critical ones. Increasing the ransomware attacks. Supply chain dependency creates a chain reaction effect globally. In fact, that will be like a tsunami effect when any of the giant service providers is disrupted, giant organizations on that one is disrupted, that will cause disruption of thousands of other organizations. Disruptions in the finance, healthcare, energy, and logistics, like critical infrastructure sectors, create societal impacts, may have direct impact on the human life and safety, and average disruption costs are increasing significantly. That's also relevant to this dependency. So, what does this standard look like? Just a quick example on it, but then we will also discuss about the clause of this standard as very high level. Now, this standard, that's the second edition of this standard. As you see here, this second edition is quite a fresh edition. The previous one was published more than 15 years ago, dear everyone. So it is a huge change. It is a hugely anticipated standard that we will be having the second edition of that. And finally, in 2025, in fact, 2025 is not like 1 year, just a couple of months ago, I can say, we had the second edition of this standard. So this standard's purpose, intended outcome, or we can say, ensuring the continuity of IT services during disruptions, enabling the recovery of critical systems, so establishing a framework on how we can recover our critical systems, and even also it includes a framework from a guidance perspective on how we can determine the critical systems, right? Enhancing operational resilience, definitely, and it has a strong relationship with 22301 and 27001 with other well-known requirement standards. I will also talk about the relation of this standard with these two significant standards on information security and business continuity management. Okay, the focus areas of this standard 2731 are definitely at the very beginning, intentionally it's written here, at the very beginning, risk assessment, risk management. Business impact analysis is a significant part of that. This is where they have an intersection with ISO 22301. Identification of critical IT services so that we can implement an efficient approach rather than only considering effectiveness, right? So we will not be implementing this approach to all our IT services, but to our critical IT services. Instant response processes, there is a separate guideline for that, ISO 22320, dear everyone. But this standard looks from an information and communication technologies perspective, how we can have an instant response structure. Some of us may know that blue teams, red teams in cybersecurity response structures. These are also listed or elaborated in this standard. Disaster recovery, as some of us may know, disaster recovery is not relevant to any other industries, but it can only be used for IT recovery. So basically, IT recovery is called disaster recovery. But recovery of a manufacturing system, production system, unless it involves IT in it, is not disaster recovery. So disaster recovery is purely used for IT recovery. Backup and data recovery guidelines. How should we establish a communication structure for such incidents? Because if our IT systems are down, we may expect our communication methodologies are down as well, right? And what can we do for crisis coordination? Again, there is a dedicated standard for crisis management, ISO 22361. But like I mentioned before, for instant response discussions, this standard 2731 looks from crisis coordination and ICT disruption. And of course, a very significant part of it, testing and exercising. That comes as a huge question, because how can we exercise disruption to a data center? Can we really shut down the entire data center? This is not mandatory. I cannot discuss about necessity because we need to know the context of the organization, but that's not mandatory. There are many other techniques, methodologies of testing and exercising. It doesn't have to be a full exercise. Like we have simulations, we have limited rehearsal, we have desktop check, and we have walkthrough. So there are different ways of exercising and testing, which are also listed in this standard. So what do the standard clauses look like? As you see here, it's a large standard, it's a detailed standard. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar, this is personally one of my favorite standards, in fact. So in the first 4 clauses, 1 to 4, we have, dear everyone, the explanation of the standard. But following that, these, in fact, clauses from 6 to 13 are the guidelines for ICT readiness for business continuity. Let's have a quick look. Integration of IRBC into business continuity management. Business expectations for IRBC, defining prerequisites for IRBC, determining IRBC strategies, determining, this is information resilience for business continuity, by the way, dear everyone, determining the ICT continuity plan, testing, exercise, and auditing, final minimum business continuity objective, top management responsibilities regarding evaluating the IRBC. So top management review basically is here. As you see, from clause 6 to 13, we have a fully presented framework for ICT readiness for business continuity, or for dealing with disaster recovery, basically. So here, another interesting one. Let's start with the one on the right-hand side, the role. This one here talks about the relation of ISO 27731, you can see it as a standalone as well, with other main standards. So let's discuss this, then we will go to this part. ISO 27731 standard can be implemented as a standalone, independent standard from 27001 or 22301. Basically, in more simple words, if you are not certified against these two standards, your organization, you can still implement 27731 as a standalone, but just it's good to remember that's a guideline standard, not a requirement standard, just like these two. So intersection of these three standards would help us to unlock the full potential of ISO 27731 standard. That's also quite significant. And they have such intersections between them as well. But basically, when we are asking the question, what will be a robust, effective methodology when implementing a framework for our organization for disaster recovery, for IT recovery, I believe the answer is right here, a combination or integration of these three standards. Other than these two standards that have relation with 27731, like 27001 and 22301, we have other standards here as well, dear everyone. Governance is a significant part, because let me just go one slide back. As you have seen, the last clause is dedicated for that. Top management is expected to have responsibility on evaluating the exercising, testing, and implementations of ICT readiness for business continuity. Incident management, there is an information security incident management standard that will help us to establish an instant response structure. There is a dedicated standard for supply chain continuity. This is not only digital supply chain continuity, that's any type of supply chain continuity, which includes digital supply chain continuity as well. So that's a significant standard. 22320, as I mentioned before, emergency management instant response structure. This is a more generic instant response structure, whereas this one, 27735, is a more dedicated information security instant response structure. And the final one is 22361, crisis management guideline standard that can help us to establish a crisis management structure within our organization relevant to business disruptions, which are originated from information technologies. Okay, here is our last poll before we proceed further with more details on ISO 27731. Dear everyone, our last poll question is, how confident are you in your organization's ability to recover from a major ICT disruption? What is your level of confidence considering your own organization? Okay, currently, yeah, the percentages are changing so fast here with the new votes coming. I can say very confident, fairly confident, somewhat uncertain. They were quite close to each other, but now fairly confident, which is plans exist but haven't been fully tested, got the highest votes here for your information. Okay, fairly. But good to know that no one said that not confident. Okay, majority of us said that fairly confident. Plans exist but haven't been fully tested. Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's continue with final FIF discussions on ISO 27731 before we move to the Q&A session. Dear everyone, definitely digital resilience is not an option today. It is a mandatory approach that we need to at least start considering it. This is an approach, this is a topic, that is an issue that needs to be placed in the top management's agenda. If we did not do that, we might be too late even for this, because disruptions are just around the corner. It can happen any minute. As we have seen, the number of disruptions, reported disruptions in the world, are also increasing because of the incidents are increasing that may lead to a disruption. So when we are considering this risk and when we need a structured approach for digital resilience, of course, the first thing is we will ask around us, what is the way that we need to follow? We will try to learn from others who already implemented a process, which their effectiveness can be questioned, right? So luckily, we have an approach in today's world that can help us to have a fast track to find answers to our questions rather than traveling entire world. We have international standards, ISO standards. So ISO IEC 2731 is the topic to that discussion today, digital resilience. As you see, it provides organizations with a structured preparedness approach to deal with any disruptive events originated from information technologies. So when we say resilience, that can be digital or corporate resilience, it means it is a marriage of technology, processes, people, governance who are working in a harmony, in fact. And you will see the touch points to all these 4 significant domains that will help us to have a resilient organization in 2731,000 standard clauses. So the benefits of implementing this international framework is we can have an approach for a faster recovery of critical systems. Definitely, we will be prepared. And as we have a plan, we will ensure that recovery or resumption of our services will be faster as opposed to comparing to not being prepared. Reduced operational losses, improved coordination during crisis, because there is a dedicated subclause in the standard about crisis coordination during a disruption, ICT disruption, regulatory and audit compliance, stringent cyber resilience. Okay, here we are, dear all, the Q&A session. We have completed discussions on these 2 topics, which is about maintaining digital resilience and what are the internationally recognized accepted standards that will help us. And the background of these standards, especially 27,001, we had the opportunity to discuss that. Dear all, now I can see that we have a few questions listed here. This is amazing. Okay, we have quite interesting ones. Let me select some of them. As I promised, dear everyone, at the very beginning, at the housekeeping rules, any questions which are not answered, we will get back to the owner of the question with an answer. We'll be working on it. So the first one is, that's an interesting one. What role should top management and governance bodies play during a major digital disruption or cyber crisis? Dear everyone, first of all, that's a quite sensitive topic because the approach or the positioning of our top management during a crisis, especially, let me go that further, during a crisis, have a direct relation with the success of this crisis, successfully managing this crisis. So this is why that's a very sensitive. Thank you very much to the owner of this question. Now, the role of top management is, dear everyone, ensuring the governance during a disruption event and managing the teams that can be instant response teams, that can be crisis management teams, managing them, ensuring that there is a coordination. But a very significant one from ISO 22361 crisis management standard, a very significant one is this. We need to ensure top management will not be in the center of this epidemic, this incident. They need to have a distance. So when there is a disruptive event relevant to information communication technologies, we are not expecting to see top management in the first second in that zone of information communication technology disruption. We need them to guide us, to support us, or to monitor the situation from a distance. This is one of the significant roles. The other one is just like a clause 13, is dedicated in ISO 2731 standard. We are expecting top management to review our practices, our implementation, our improvement of our ICT readiness framework processes to be monitored, to be evaluated, to be guided by them. So these are the 2 significant things before a disruption and after a disruption. Of course, ISO 2714 governance guideline standard for information security will be quite helpful to establish this structure and position our top management. Okay. The other question I would like to go is, how can organizations realistically test their digital resilience capabilities without causing disruption to live operations? Amazing question. I think this question has been asked during the delivery of this session because we had a very quick summary on that one. Dear everyone, the one of the clauses in ISO 2731 is relevant to testing and exercising. In fact, this clause is going hand in hand with another standard, ISO 22398, guidelines for exercising testing standard. These two standards having a list of methodologies, exercising methodologies that can be used by organizations. So basically, we talk about 6 different methodologies. The namings can be different, but I believe we are all talking about the same thing. What are they? Walkthrough exercise, desktop check, simulation, limited rehearsal, full exercise, and call tree. Now, full exercise is the one that we may expect a real disruption to our systems. In the scale of effectiveness, that can be maybe the most effective, we may say, exercising methodology. But in means of efficiency, the time spent on that one, the preparations made for that, and also in means of the risks that may cause a real disruption, efficiency is low, risk causing a real disruption is high, but effectiveness also high. But is this the only way of exercising? In other words, in simple words, do we have to shut down the entire data center to test it? No, that is not the only option. As I listed before, we can also go through walkthrough exercise. Basically, having, just like the name mentions, that having a walkthrough on our business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans. Or we can have a simulation exercise. Like we can simulate an environment that, let's say, we are having backups, and we can simulate an environment that these backups are lost, how we can revert them, how we can bring them back, basically. So that's a simulation. We don't need to make them work on a real life environment. But of course, like I mentioned, dear everyone, that's a business decision. That's an organization's decision. You need to consider effectiveness, efficiency, and the risks, especially these 3 topics, when you are making the decision on the right optimum exercising methodology. Okay. The other one is, okay, that's an interesting one. With increasing dependency on cloud and third-party providers, how should organizations redefine accountability for resilience and recovery? Oh my goodness, amazing question. Congratulations to that attendee of ours, participant of ours who asked that question. Amazing one. Dear everyone, accountability is one of the biggest problems here today. Because when we are having, just like mentioned in the question, when we are having more dependency on suppliers, but we have responsibility, not accountability now, I will come there, against our clients, when a disruption happens at our supplier end. Let's give an example like this. In fact, that will be easier, I believe, to elaborate that. Let's think about a bank, a financial institution. If this financial institution had a disruption due to a cloud service provider, I am a client, a customer of this bank, and I am in a position at a vacation abroad, desperately need to withdraw cash amount to travel back to my hotel, I don't know, to make a payment for something, but I desperately need cash money. And my bank has a commitment to me, wherever I am in the world, I can withdraw cash money. Now, because of this cloud service provider disruption, which is supplier to my bank, I cannot withdraw the amount that I need. So the bank could not promise given to me. I'm a quite frustrated and unhappy client. Now, in such a case, dear everyone, Who is accountable? Can banks say that, dear Kürşat, don't get upset with us because disruption happened due to our cloud service provider systems? I honestly will say, I don't mind. I don't care. This is not my problem. I am working with you. I am not the one influencing which service provider, cloud service provider you will be working with, right? It will not help me with my desperate situation. It won't help me and with how I am feeling about this bank right now. So, who is accountable in that case? Is it bank? Bank has an agreement with the supplier. Is it supplier? Supplier is providing services, which I'm pretty sure they did not promise that we will have zero disruption in a year, right? It's not an easy promise to give. So in that case, dear everyone, risk management comes to our help. Those who are familiar with risk management structure, we have the risk assessment and then the risk treatment processes. Under risk treatment, we have risk treatment options. Generally, that's not a solid definition, but generally they are identified as 4 T's: treat the risk, transfer the risk, tolerate, and terminate the risk. So the discussion that we are having about accountability is transferring the risk. However, something very important, an organization cannot transfer reputational risks, but we can transfer financial risk. Like we can say that, look, dear cloud service provider, bank is talking to the cloud service provider, because of you, millions of my customers could not use our ATM services. According to contract, you have to pay me a penalty. And this penalty will be paid as a compensation to our clients, just as an example. So you are sharing, transferring means sharing. You are sharing the risk of financial loss. But the reputational risk, this cannot be transferred or shared with a third party, with a supplier. So coming to the answer to that question after these long explanations, who is accountable for ICT readiness of business continuity? In our example, it is the bank. In general, it is not the suppliers. Suppliers would have responsibility, but the accountability of an organization on the delivery of products and services is with them. And this cannot be delegated to anyone else, right? Okay, brilliant. I would like to go to another question. I don't know if the time will permit, but if I can have time, I will try to answer one more question, but this might be the last. Okay. Dear everyone, the question says, in your experience, what are the biggest gaps organizations face when trying to align cybersecurity, business continuity, and ICT resilience together? Oh, these 3 standards, right? Let's not call it cybersecurity. Let's call it information security, right? That will be more relevant to the topic. Okay, so the question will be, what are the biggest gaps or the issues organizations are facing when aligning? Let me say it from the standards perspective, like ISO 27001, Information Security Management System, ISO 22301, Business Continuity Management System, and ISO 2731, a guideline standard on ICT readiness for business continuity. Dear everyone, the biggest gap is organizations are not using harmonized approach applicable to requirement standards. The famous approach, which clauses 4 to 10 are similar among these 2 standards, ISO 27001 and 22301. So that's the starting point, I can say. The other one is a collective expertise, very important, from the implementation team I'm talking about. Collective expertise means that, dear everyone, a business continuity management system professional is not necessarily an information security management professional, and vice versa. And more surprisingly, an information security management system professional does not mean a professional on ISO 2731, the ICT readiness for business continuity. This is why either a single person who has all these competence or multiple people that are coming together to establish this management system, who have competence on the more significant critical areas of those three standards, they need to come together and they need to establish these management systems. So competence, technical competence on these three standards is quite significant. The other one is top management support. In fact, I can say that maybe more important than these first two topics that I have mentioned. Using harmonized approach, bringing together competent people who can implement these three standards. Maybe the third one is more important, more significant than these two. Maybe, according to context of the organization, of course. But top management support. Briefly, we can say that if top management support, if top management's hands are not on information security and business continuity standards, apologies, these standards or these management systems are doomed to collapse, and in the near future. History shows that to us. This is why we have dedicated requirements clauses for top management in both ISO 27001 and 22301. As you have seen before, this is not a different case for ISO 2731, because ISO 2731 as a guideline standard recommends top management review on ICT readiness for business continuity. So we still need top management in this guideline standard as well. This is why top management support is quite significant for an effective and efficient integration of these three standards. Other than this, and the last thing that I will be saying, I will not make a comment about how significant it is compared to the first three topics here. Apologies. Implementing an effective, well-designed, tailor-made to the organization needs business impact analysis. Of course, I can list many other significant processes, like risk management process is a very significant one. Monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation is a very significant one. But I want to highlight, I want to put BIA in the spotlight. Business impact analysis, dear everyone, where all these three standards would have an intersection. That will help us. That is the sole purpose of BIAs, business impact analysis. That is the sole purpose of them. This is identifying prioritized activities, prioritized processes, prioritized infrastructure, so that it will help us to have a focused scope rather than trying to establish business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans for all systems. That's quite helpful. This is why BIA, that may take a long time to implement, a long time to make it run and get the outputs, but every second that we spend for an effective business impact analysis will be worth it. Okay, great. There are a few more, dear everyone, but we don't have time to go through each of these questions. As we discussed, as we mentioned, we will reach out to the owners of these questions to provide the answers for them. I would like to thank you on behalf of BSI for your 1 hour in this session. Truly appreciated, and hopefully it was beneficial. Some areas of them were eye-opening to discover worlds beyond ISO 27001 and 22301 when we are talking about maintaining digital resilience. Thank you very much again for joining us today, and looking forward to have you in another session. Please remember, the nearest one is May 18th. We will have the next session. It's quite an interesting topic as well. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day.